Thank the member and recognize the member from Vancouver Fairview.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And it's actually an honour to be able to rise to speak to this motion to refer, having already spoken to this bill at second reading. And it's an honour because I believe, as my constituents do, that the challenge of food security is one that we need to take seriously, that we need to address, and that the best tool we have at our disposal is the legacy that we've been left of the Agricultural Land Commission and the Agricultural Land Reserve. And for that reason, I think this bill is ill-advised. Not only is the bill itself ill-advised, the method of implementing it is ill-advised. Bringing it in under a core review is ill-advised and frankly makes no sense, Honourable Speaker. The issue of a core review is, as I understood it, a process by which we looked at which activities of government were central to the needs and purposes of British Columbians, that what do people expect from their government. To assume that the Agricultural Land Commission and the Reserve are things that are not central to the concerns of British Columbians is, I believe, a misguided notion. I think the government certainly has the right to raise the issue of the land reserve and raise the issue of how decisions are made, but it would seem to me to be appropriate to do that through a consultative process, through some sort of forewarning in an election platform, through some sort of broad-based discussion of something that is so fundamental to the future well-being of all British Columbians. I mean, it's said that that without a roof over our heads, without food and without water, we have nothing. And I would say that's true. And so something so central as the ability to feed ourselves in a changing world seems to not be something that should be addressed willy-nilly by the government through any means at its disposal without some long and involved and genuine discussion with the British Columbians who will be impacted by this, not just this generation of British Columbians, not just British Columbians in this term of office of this government, but British Columbians and our children and our children's children far into the future. So, Honourable Speaker, of course it is a pleasure to stand and speak, but it's not a pleasure to have to speak on a bill that I think is so fundamentally dangerous to the interests of British Columbians, and a process that I believe is profoundly disrespectful of what British Columbians expect from a democratic process and a democratic government, and has no bearing whatsoever on the issues on which the government campaigned. Now, Honourable Speaker, I understand that issues arise that government has to address that can't be foreseen in an election campaign or addressed directly in the platform on which a party runs during the campaign. But, Honourable Speaker, an agricultural land reserve and the Commission charged with overseeing and implementing a process by which decisions are made about agricultural land and applications for exclusion, surely, Honourable Speaker, cannot be characterized as an emergent situation that could not have been foreseen. In fact, Honourable Speaker, when questioned by Country Life magazine on their platform going into the campaign, the government party clearly stated its commitment was to protect agricultural land, to work toward greater preservation of agricultural land, to support the Agricultural Land Commission, and to give the Agricultural Land Commission more resources with which to do its job. Now, Honourable Speaker, maybe the ministers opposite who are charged with being in this House to listen to our party raise the concerns of British Columbians about this particular piece of legislation think that they're actually carrying through that platform commitment. But, Honourable Speaker, I can assure you that British Columbians, by and large, whether those that are assessed by polling, those who have written letters to my constituency, to other MLAs, to the minister himself, they certainly don't believe that. The associations representing people involved in the cattle industry and in agriculture don't believe that. People who are responsible for supporting the local food industry, whether it's the farmers markets associations or people who work on food policy, don't believe that. And another reason that it's a good time for me to be standing in this House today and addressing this issue is because across the aisle is the Minister of Transportation, with whom I've had many exchanges over the previous few months. And the lines that the Minister of Transportation used repeatedly to explain why he was pursuing other pieces of legislation were essentially twofold: that he and his government believed in democracy and consulting British Columbians. This is with respect to a referendum on TransLink in the Metro Vancouver region. And the other thing the Minister of Transportation said frequently is that when we make a campaign promise, we keep it, and we promised a referendum. Well, Honourable Speaker, I would say through you to the Minister of Transportation, but perhaps more importantly to the absent Ministers of Agriculture and the Minister responsible for the core review, who appears to be the real driving force behind this legislation, not just in his role as Minister responsible for the core review, but as a Minister with a long-held reputation for being annoyed by the Agricultural Land Reserve and Commission because it stood in the way of development proposals that he wished to see proceed. Honourable Speaker, I would say to these ministers that when you say, in response to a question about your party's commitment to agriculture in this province, to the Agricultural Land Commission, to the preservation of the Agricultural Land Reserve, that you are committed to preserving and strengthening the Agricultural Land Reserve, and then bring in a piece of legislation like Bill 24, that the most the government has claimed is that it will not weaken the reserve, and most commentators say will significantly weaken the reserve. What you owe British Columbians at a minimum is consultation and review and time to think this over and understand the proposal, because perhaps, Honourable Speaker, although nothing in this session of the legislature leads me to believe that it's true, nothing in any of the other bills that we've seen or any of the other reasonable amendments that have been proposed leads me to believe that this is true. Perhaps, following consultation and review and testimony from experts and testimony from people in the farming and food communities, this government might actually see that this legislation is ill-advised and choose not to proceed with it, which, Honourable Speaker, is precisely why we on this side of the House have moved to refer this bill to a committee that has sadly not been utilized or thought important enough to have any significant role under this government. We have proposed that this legislation be referred to committee so it can be studied, so that British Columbians have a chance to bring their voices forward, experts have a chance to talk about what it would mean in their view to make these changes, what it would mean to the agricultural industry, what it would mean to food processors and the people in British Columbia who market food, what it would mean to the future interests of British Columbians in a time of climate change to take chances about how much agricultural land we will need today, in the future, as well as which agricultural land might actually be suitable for which crops as we experience changing climate north of the 49th and in northern British Columbia. Honourable Speaker, a government that cared about the future of British Columbians' food security wouldn't hesitate to allow this bill to go to consultation, to go to committee, to be reviewed further. Because, Honourable Speaker, what's the rush? We're coming back in the fall. We're coming back in the fall to discuss a tax regime for the liquid natural gas industry. That's important enough for the government to call the House back. And as they should, Honourable Speaker, the standing orders call for a fall sitting, notwithstanding the fact that we haven't seen too many of them under this government. But, Honourable Speaker, what would be the flaw? or the harm to British Columbia, to the agriculture industry, to farmers, and most importantly, to people who rely on food as the staff of life, to review this legislation and bring it back in the fall for further debate. Honorable Speaker, I believe nothing is lost except perhaps the government's ability to ram this legislation through and hope people forget about it over the summer and they don't have to deal with the fallout and opposition that is engendered throughout British Columbia as people learn about what this government says before an election and what it does after an election, what they claim to believe about food security and what they actually do, flying in the face of the opinions and statements of experts of the agriculture industry and of food producers, processors, and marketers. Honorable Speaker, this is legislation that deserves further review because it's legislation that endangers the economy of British Columbia, the security of British Columbians, and the ability of British Columbians to feed ourselves for generations to come. That's why something so critical, so fundamental to our well-being, so fundamental to life itself in British Columbia should not be pushed through, should not be subject to the kind of forced vote through time allocation that we saw brought in today, should not be rammed through because there is no need to do so. What's the rush? Why won't we take the time? Why won't we take 3 or 4 or 6 months to ensure that the decisions made in this legislature that will so profoundly impact the security of British Columbians and our ability to be self-sufficient in food long after every single member who sits in this chamber has gone from this planet, long after the legacy that will be left will be shaped by the decisions that are made here over the next 2 days, unless this government takes a step back and understands that this isn't a game of chess between government and the opposition. Honorable Speaker, this is a legitimate discussion between members on this side of the House doing what our role is as the official, loyal opposition, which is bringing the concerns of British Columbians about a very, very significant piece of legislation, significant because it goes to our very ability to feed ourselves. Honorable Speaker, we have seen what happens in other parts of the world when there is drought, when food prices rise, when there are food shortages and scarcity. The very elements of the social fabric begin to be unraveled. Conflict arises. And it's understandable, Honorable Speaker, because what is more fundamental than the ability to be fed, than the ability to have enough food on the table for one's family, to have the strength to go out and work and to play and not have to worry about where the next scrap of food is coming from. Honorable Speaker, that is why scientists, that is why people in the agriculture industry, that is why people involved in markets have stepped forward and called for the government to withdraw this legislation and to consult more broadly, because this is a government that in other areas has claimed that there is no level of consultation that is too great for their democratic commitment. Honorable Speaker, you can't apply that standard to one area of governance and turn your back on it in another. It's not consistent. It's not good governance. It's not keeping the promises that have been made to British Columbians. And particularly when you're refusing to consult on something that was never even whispered about in the campaign platform or the campaign that a government ran on. It's just simply wrong, Honorable Speaker. It's wrong to expect British Columbians to put up with that kind of treatment. It's wrong to expect us on this side of the House to pay pro forma attention to a debate on a bill and not to use every single tool available to us to hope that this government, in the course of the debate, will listen to the opinions of British Columbians and take a step back and consult and hear from experts. Obviously, the members at the end of the row who are making so much noise don't want to even hear the debate that's going on in the House, but I will do my best to speak over their voices, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Speaker, let me remind the government of some of the information that has come out from its own reviews of its own ministries. Members opposite oftentimes have said to us on this side of the House, Honourable Speaker, that we don't respect the opinions of public servants. That's not true, Honourable Speaker. We know they're hardworking, and we know particularly that people who express scientific opinions, when asked to do so by government, do so with a firm belief that the trust that is placed in them is a trust of all British Columbians, and they have to give unbiased and honest advice. So let's listen to a couple of points that are contained in the BC government's own Agricultural Climate Action Plan 2010 to 2013. What they pointed out, Honourable Speaker, is that between 2010 and 2039, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change projects average warming of 1 to 3 degrees centigrade across much of North America and beyond this period. They also point out in this Climate Action Initiative, BC Agriculture and Food, that there are a number of broad changes identified for BC in the report, including increasing climate variation and more extreme weather events, shrinking of glaciers, with many expected to disappear, that will result in serious impacts on water availability, reduction of snow accumulations, particularly at lower elevations, warming by anywhere from 2 to 7 degrees centigrade by 2080 that will impact sea levels, precipitation patterns, and ecosystems, increasing frequency and severity of wildfires, increasing frequency and severity of pest, disease, and invasive plant outbreaks. Honourable Speaker, let me return to one of these changes. Warming by 2 to 7 degrees centigrade by 2080. Honourable Speaker, that's 66 years from now. 66 years will be long, long past the impacts of any development proposal that short-sighted proponents might make for immediate short-term gain, but well within the range of a time frame that we seriously need to consider when we're talking about the ability of British Columbians, whose population will have grown significantly by that time because of massive influx of immigration by people who will see British Columbia as both a province with an environment and a climate that has been less severely impacted than other jurisdictions in the world. What the Climate Action Initiative for BC Agriculture and Food goes on to say is that these changes are likely to have consequences for food production through impacts to health and quality of crops, pasture, forests, and livestock. And the biophysical changes are anticipated to result in socioeconomic impacts which could also be felt in BC, even if the more dramatic changes are occurring elsewhere. And the impacts include declines in yield and production, fluctuation in world market prices for food, changes in geographic distribution of trade regimes, and an increasing number of people at risk of hunger. Now, Honourable Speaker, a couple of things stand out for me from this report and that particular statement. One is that, as other speakers have pointed out, we're already seeing a significant curtailment of food production through massive drought that has been going on for 3 years south of the border in California, as well as in other parts of the United States, on which British Columbians have relied for food. Honourable Speaker, if that's what's happening today, two things will happen to us. It will get worse as the climate changes, as drought gets worse, and California will both raise the prices of any food it exports or simply decide that it needs every scrap of food it produces to feed its own people or to feed others in the United States. So, Honorable Speaker, we should learn from that lesson two things. One is that land that we think of as less productive today may well be more productive tomorrow and may well be suitable for more and greater range of crops. And another thing we should understand is that land that we think of as greatly productive today in and around the Lower Mainland may not be so productive in the future because of global warming and may not have access to the water that it needs to grow the food that we now depend on. And we should also understand, Honorable Speaker, that the ability to feed British Columbians with British Columbian grown food is only going to increase, and that in fact that is the development opportunity that we're not grasping. That security for the future to feed ourselves is in fact the economic and social opportunity that we cannot let slip through our fingers from the kind of short-sighted decisions that are contemplated by Bill 24. Because, Honorable Speaker, if it isn't the intent of Bill 24 to remove farmland from production to meet the pressures of people in regions around British Columbia who have some short-term development idea to make a profit, then what is the bill for? That's exactly what it's for, and that's exactly why people around British Columbia are opposing it, and that's exactly why this government should keep its commitment to protect farmland and should keep the commitment it's crowed about in other situations to consult British Columbians, to listen to British Columbians, and to let British Columbians have a voice. So, Honorable Speaker, I say, as the Minister of Transportation has said to me, let democracy flourish and let this bill be referred to a committee for genuine consultation, to hear from experts, to hear from farmers, to hear from British Columbians, and to ensure that if this bill or some form of it were to go forward in the future, in the fall, because there is no rush, it will have been thoroughly discussed and debated, and British Columbians will have had a chance to hold the government's feet to the fire on this plan, to explain itself and to demonstrate how Bill 24 improves and preserves farmland and provides greater resources to the Agricultural Land Commission, as this government said it was going to do, or at the very least has no negative impact whatsoever. Honorable Speaker, if the government is concerned about this, if the government believes that the commitments it made in the last election are the commitments that are embodied in this bill, it should have no fear about consulting. The minister responsible for the core review, in fact, said, "It's my mea culpa," or "the mea culpa is on me," I think were his exact words, for not holding a consultation. Well, if you didn't do it then, do it now, because that's what British Columbians expect. That's the lesson that should have been learned. That's the lesson that should have been learned after the last election. And I call on the government, through you, Honorable Speaker, to let democracy flourish, refer this bill, and let's have a full discussion of this so important issue with British Columbians before we make decisions geared to short-sighted profit of a limited number of individuals that compromises the future ability of our children and our grandchildren to feed themselves. Honorable Speaker, the Climate Action Initiative for Agriculture and Food went on to say, land continues to be removed from the reserve, and 86% of the land excluded since 2002 has been in regions with the highest concentration of prime farmland. It went on to say, while there is value in assessing future crop suitability, such work must also include a realistic evaluation of possible changes in precipitation and hydrology as well as the current socio-economic context of agriculture in BC. Honourable Speaker, if we were actually to do this, we wouldn't allow any changes, certainly in the next 3 or 4 months, which means why not refer the bill and have a consultation? Let the committee do its work before irreversible mistakes are made. Honourable Speaker, there is great risk in this legislation. Great risk. The Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions says the common assumption that a warming climate will be a boon for agricultural production in northern climes is now recognized to be false. The full suite of projected changes indicates that the risks to agricultural viability are substantial. To the farmer on the land, this means that the past is no longer a sufficient guide to the future. So, Honourable Speaker, what does this mean to the Minister of Agriculture or the Minister responsible for the core review when they claim that there is land that is less viable for agriculture and that's the land that's being considered for change? What that means is they have no way of knowing. None of us have any way of knowing. And what that says to me and to members on this side of the House and to British Columbians is, Honourable Speaker, that we need to know, we need to take the time to know, and we should not be passing this bill today. What we should be doing, as the Institute for Climate Solutions says, is conducting collaborative, applied research, risk assessments, variety trials, and we need to build the long-term capacity of the agricultural industry by enabling new entrants. We need to continue to protect farmland, not create new mechanisms for removing it. Honourable Speaker, my time is coming to a close, but let me close by quoting from a letter to the Premier by a group of soil scientists. They said, "With Bill 24, we will not only lose ground in the literal sense, but also in the public policy sense." This is from Dr. Art Baumke, the Professor Emeritus in the UBC Faculty of Land and Food Systems. The Agricultural Land Reserve was established because local and regional authorities could not be relied upon to protect our scarce and irreplaceable farmland from non-farm development. The 6-panel system contained within Bill 24 potentially takes us right back to the 1973 situation that gave rise to the establishment of the provincial ALR and the Provincial Land Commission in the first place. And Dr. Drew Yates says, "Where is the evidence that Bill 24 will help the ALC preserve agricultural land and encourage farmers to farm it?" I think the evidence points to the opposite. Honourable Speaker, that's what scientists say. Let me simply say that, like every member of this House, and I hope every member on the opposite side of the House and the Minister of Agriculture, there have been many letters and emails from people concerned about what's happening to the Agricultural Land Commission or what might happen through Bill 24. In the last few days alone, since Saturday, we've had 22 emails in my constituency office alone, and let me give you a sample. They say, "Thanks to the ALR, British Columbia has maintained a steady number of farms, while the rest of Canada has lost about 1/3 of its farms over recent decades. I call on you to defend BC's farmland and reject this dangerous bill." Honourable Speaker, from the BC Association of Farmers Markets Board of Directors, they are opposed to giving regional panelists the authority to make initial decision. They say BC voted for a Liberal government with a campaign promise that said, "Yes, we will maintain the excellent relationship we have built with the ALC. We will work more closely with farmers, ranchers, and agricultural organizations to preserve agricultural land." Honourable Speaker, if that is the Liberals' commitment, refer this bill to committee for further consultation, listen to British Columbians, give them a chance to voice their concerns. Honourable Speaker, I support this motion to refer, and I call on all members of this House, in the interests of democracy, in the interests of keeping campaign commitments, to do the same. Thank you very much.